second step is really to choose your design. So choose the design that you want to do. With the design that we chose, which we're going to show you here in a few minutes, but we chose, they wanted to choose sort of a modern look. They wanted a more modern looking landscape. But there's, all sorts of different things. You might want to choose a pollinator garden, or you might want more of like a California native type garden, or maybe you want something that's more succulents or something, or more of a cottage garden look. Whatever it might be, choose the design. And I'm going to show you a few free design resources here in a minute. But this is the design that we did for the project. This is part of the design. I just clipped it out of there. But they before just had a walkway that went to their front step here. And so they wanted these big pavers to make it look a little bit more modern. So it's pavers with black and white gravel on it. And it does definitely make the house look a lot more modern. So, and then we just kind of chose landscaping that also looked, they liked the kind of Tuscan look as well. So that's one of the things that we tried to incorporate into their landscape. And we'll show you a little later the plants that we chose for that. So again, you want to think about what plants you want to use, what kind of landscape style you want, and then diagram out your yard as far as like where you want different things. So there's a couple of things that you want to include in that diagram. Are there particular areas that you want a particular use for? So like for instance, they wanted a seating area out by their olive tree. So where that number 1 is on this design right here, that's their little seating area. So they wanted an area that they could go out and sit and enjoy the evening or whatever. So that would be something that you'd want to mark on your design. Marking where the shade or sun areas are. So this area right here gets a lot of afternoon shade. So that might be something that you'd want to have noted on your design. So as you're choosing plants, you're kind of putting them appropriately where you need them to go. The other thing that a lot of times beginning designers make kind of a mistake with is that they don't stand out on the street and look at their design as if they're facing the house. They stand at the house and look out as if they're facing the street. And on the front yard, you want a design that looks good from the front as people approach your home, right? It shouldn't look bad as you're looking out either, but you really want to have it where the perspective of that design is from the front. In your backyard, it might be the opposite, because a lot of times you have a fence or something in the back, so that you standing at the house and looking out at the yard would be the perspective that you want the landscape to look its best from. But just kind of keep that in mind. A lot of times people that make that mistake, and that you really should be designing your yard from the sidewalk looking at your house versus from your porch looking out. If that makes sense. And then here's a lot of different resources on things that you can choose. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I want to show you a couple of them. So I will stop and show you a couple. There's a couple of different things here. So the Arboretum at UC Davis has a list of Arboretum All-Stars that they have trialed all over California. So Redding was actually one of those trial sites for their plants. They chose 100 plants from the UC Arboretum that they said were the most water-wise. They looked good most of the year, so they didn't have a bad looking portion of the year where they just looked really ratty or something. And they took minimal care, so they weren't taking a lot of time to maintain them. And then they sent them out to gardens. There was 11 different garden sites from Redding, which is the furthest north, to San Diego, which was the furthest south. And they had master gardeners follow them for 3 years and write down how they looked in different conditions. We got some of the plants and they didn't do well in Redding. They didn't like the heat, they died quickly. But a lot of them did really well. So the list that did well over a large area made this Arboretum All-Star list. So they have a list of plants that you can check out, and they have information about them with color pictures and everything. They also have a couple of simple designs, so incorporating those plants. So if you wanted to include something, just a simple design, that is something that you could just use their design and drop it right into your front yard or wherever. Redding, watersmart.com, and I do want to show you this one, because this one has, if you're not aware of this, you should be. The city of Redding has this resource that I think is really kind of nice, because they have it, they have sample gardens, so you can kind of get inspirations of different gardens. And then they have a plant list with a lot of different features. And then they have some different front yards. So just to kind of give you an example, I disagree with on some of them, but just to show you an example, if you hover over the plant, it'll tell you what it is, and then it'll give you like a landscape of different plants. So they have several to choose from. I don't think redwoods are very water wise, so I don't know that I would necessarily choose that, but they do have quite a few things. And then they have the different plant lists, and they have them listed by the different types. So there's like ornamental grasses, native plants, things that ground covers, wildlife or pollinators, things that attract butterflies. They have a bunch of different things for clay soils. So like if you click on the plant list, then they give you a whole list of different plants that you can plant within that. And some of these are extremely water-wise, and then some are kind of in the moderate water-wise. So you want to be a little bit careful with that, but for the most part, they're more water-wise than a lawn, for sure. But some of them are even, not as water-wise, I should say. And then if you click on the plant, for instance, like if I just click on this one, it tells me the plant, how I can use it, how big it gets, all the information about it, and then it has a description. A description below that kind of tells you a little bit more about it. So this would be something that goes well in the shade. It does well in most soils, that sort of thing. Yes?
You mentioned that some of them are quite low water use, but some are more moderate. How do you determine which is the moderate one?
Well, I'll get to that. Okay. So thank you for that question. Give me a moment, I'll get there. So if you, to answer Kristen's question, I'll get to that in just a minute, but there is a way that if you take the name of the plant, then you can look that up. I think if I just go to the galleries. Oh yeah, so here's all the different gardens you can take a look at. So like if you want to say a low maintenance garden, or if you're more of a hillside garden or a parking strip, a backyard, whatever, and then you click on those. So like, let's say you wanted just the backyard, they usually have, well, they had a whole bunch, they have 21 of them, and I don't know why I can't go to the next one. Oh, here it is. So you can just go through the slideshow and see all the different, they'll give you ideas for different backyards of ones. And the same with the front yard and so forth. And if you hover where those boxes are, it'll tell you what those plants are. So it's a nice feature of kind of getting some ideas, some inspiration of things that you might like. So the California Landscape, or the California Native Plant Society, I should say, has come up with a landscape planner that allows you to kind of plan for 4 different styles of native plant gardens, and that they'll make suggestions for what will work for you. So it's a pretty simple process. They have 4 questions that you put in. And so if you just click on the begin part, you type in what city you're in. So I'll just put in Redding, since that's where we're at. And then, sorry, I'm not trying to block the thing. Then you want to choose kind of what style you like. So do you want simple and elegant, or HOA friendly, or a pollinator garden, or whatever, right? Outdoor living. I'm gonna choose just simple and elegant, just to give you an example. And then you're gonna choose next, and then you'll choose your sun exposure by just clicking on what you have. So I'm just gonna choose full sun, and then we'll go next. And then you can decide kind of what you want. We're going to choose water conservation because that's our topic for the day. And then go next. And it will plan out, it'll give you a list of plants that, that you might like to use. So it'll tell you the plant, so this interior live oak, it'll tell you what it needs for sun exposure, how low a water need it has, and then, you know, if it's good for birds or butterflies or whatever, gives you the size that it gets and so forth. So it can give you a lot of good places to start as far as plants that you might like to choose, especially if you're wanting to choose some native plants. And the nice thing is, because you put in your city, right, it's going to suggest plants for you that will do well here, or at least will I shouldn't say do well, but will survive here. Sometimes they struggle a little bit, but where they're not going to suggest stuff that, you know, really only would grow well on the coast or something, right? So that's a list of the native plant stuff. There's also the other thing that I included on the PowerPoint is, let's see if I can unhighlight that for just a second. The other thing I included on here is just a more advanced search in CalScape. You can actually put in, you know, if you want a native plant and you want it just for ground cover and just for, you know, a shady spot or something, it'll give you a really short list. It'll ask you, you know, where are you searching for and so forth, and it'll give you a list of plants. So that's another resource that's really handy, especially if you already know, hey, I know I want a native plant here. I know what I need it to do. You know, give me a plant that's going to work, right? It also gives you suggestions on where you might be able to find it. And I should mention Doug Mandel. He's here. I asked him if he would bring a few native plants because I just wanted to have you see that we have he's starting a native plant nursery here in Reading area, which is a huge resource for us because we haven't had, you know, basically our closest nursery that's really dedicated to native plants is in Chico. So it's nice to have something a little bit closer. And he also donated some of the plants to the landscape, so his nursery did. So anyway, I want to say thank you, and also just, you know, there's another resource for you that's local. But they also, on that CalScape site, will give you nurseries that might carry the plant that you chose. Because as you know, sometimes it's hard to choose a plant that, you choose a plant and then you can't find it, right? So anyway, that's another resource. The other place that you can look at, and I won't show you this, but the water saving, the water district in Sonoma County came up with a bunch of water saving plans after the massive fires in 2017 that went through and took out, you know, a whole bunch of homes in Santa Rosa. And so they offer designs for free. All you have to do is go into that site, the design template site. They have 4 free designs that you can choose from. And you can choose kind of your lot size, like lot considerations of how your lot shape. You can make some tweaks to that, each design. And they will give you designs, planting plans, all sorts of things. So, and they give you plant suggestions for those. The majority of the plants will do well here. So there's I think in looking them over, there was just a couple plants I kind of went, I don't know if I'd want to use that in Reading. It might struggle a little bit, but most of them will do well in Reading. And yes, the watersavingpartners.org. It's a second paragraph to the bottom. Thank you. I knew I'd put it somewhere, but then I didn't see it. So that's also available to you, and it's free. You can actually download them as giant landscape plans if you wanted, and it has design details of like how to install the irrigation, all sorts of. It's very thorough, like you hired a landscape designer to do, you know, everything. So if you had to submit plans because you know, you're doing a large landscape, it would fit that criteria. So anyway, those are available to you as well. And then finally, I did want to highlight some of the plants that we chose in our landscape makeover. These are the plants that we chose, though some of them we ended up actually swapping out, like the Carl Foster grass. But for the most part, these are some of the ones that we chose. So my design class, so I had some landscape design students that worked on this design, and then they presented to the homeowners, and the homeowner, each one had a different plan, and the homeowner chose one of the students' plans. So that was kind of the process that went through that. It was very educational for the students because they had to meet with the client and find out what they wanted. They had to then draw up the whole set of plans, and then they had to do another meeting with them and present their plan, and then there were some changes. So that, anyway, it was really good for them to see the whole process of how that went. And one of the things that came out of that is that the Carl Foster grass got ditched, but that was just part of the design process. But this list, as you can see, is kind of a mix of different things. They wanted some fruit trees in their front, and they wanted something. They had a lot of they had rosemary and lavender existing that they didn't want to get rid of. So they wanted something to kind of tie those things in, and they wanted modern looking, but they also wanted it to be a Tuscan landscape, and they wanted it to produce fruit, and they wanted it to be water-wise. We're like, good grief. But so I think we've met the fine balance, but it was a good challenge for my students because we had to go through several kind of layers of discussion about how do we meet all of those objectives, but still meet our main objective of it being a very water-wise landscape. And so what we ended up doing is we got two of these kumquat trees you'll see in the final landscape. And because they will need slightly more water because they're producing fruit, they're on a different drip line, and everything else is on a different system. So that's one way that you can kind of hydrozone the yard, and that's something I'm going to talk about you want to do with your plants, is consider grouping plants that need the same water within the same drip line or within, close together in an area so that you can water them. But anyway, that's something. We chose, they have a red mailbox on their house, and they didn't want to really get rid of their red mailbox. So we tied in the red mailbox by adding these yuccas that are bright red. So they're called brake lights, and they have bright red flowers, but their leaves also have red in them. So even when they're not blooming, they have red. And a lot of people think of yucca and think of the yellow ones that kind of get tall and are kind of messy after a while. These don't do that. They look like a little bit of a cross between a grass and a succulent all year, and they don't get messy. Very little maintenance on them. They don't get messy. So anyway, that was one of the plants we chose. And then they wanted an olive. That was their main ask, because they wanted to have an olive tree. So we chose a fruitless olive. And so they'll have a fruitless olive in their yard, and that's we planted that. And then this sedum down here doesn't really picture the sedum that we chose. It's actually a mix of native sedum that the Ghost Pine Nursery donated, and some of the yellow sedum that is available pretty much at any nursery. Partly because the yellow sedum said it would do well in full sun. So, and I've had that before in my yard, and it did well. So anyway, that's the plant list that we kind of chose, and we can talk to you more about that later. Okay, let's see. All right. Wish they'd hurry up and feed the cows. They're getting on our. See. All right. Remember, I said that we would talk a little bit about how do we find out how a plant is going to be as far as is it moderate water use or low water use or high water use, especially if we don't have something like the Native Plant Society's list that shows us, hey, it's a low water user, right? So all water use in plants is measured by evapotranspiration, or ET. And evapotranspiration is a mix of the loss from the plant transpiring. So plants, in order to photosynthesize, take up water from their roots and they evaporate them out their leaf just so that they can bring in CO2 gas so that they can photosynthesize. Also helps them cool and keep themselves cool and so forth. But and then they also evaporate water just off their leaf or off the ground or whatever. So evapotranspiration captures all that water loss for the whole plant. And so different plants have different ET rates. They have different evapotranspiration rates. They have different water loss rates. And so this is how they're measured. And then, so they come up with a set evapotranspiration rate for 6-inch tall grass. And then they compare all different species to that. And so each plant species then has its own reference basic evapotranspiration rate based off that reference ET, which is the 6-inch tall fescue grass. And then they reference all the different species off of that. So it's always a percentage of whatever that 100% is the grass, and then everything else is referenced to that grass, if that makes sense. So California uses, in order to measure this, California uses this California Irrigation Management Information System, and they have these weather stations out all over the country measuring evapotranspiration rates in different areas. You can log into them and get, real-time data where you get that day's data, or you can also get historical data of what it typically is like, in the month of June in Redding, right? We have one of these here on our campus, so we're one of the stations for Northern California. Shasta County actually has 2 stations. One's here on site. We're station 224 if you want to look it up. And if you are interested in that, I'll show you, if you want to just talk to me individually, I'll show you how to look it up. But, and then there's one also in MacArthur area. So because our climate in those 2 areas are so different, even though we're in the same county. But anyway, they report evapotranspiration data, that reference data, right? So that's where you get the reference data. And then the University of California has taken that reference data and compared it to all these different plant species, and they've trialed them for multiple years to see how much water they'll use. And then they've come up with a list, which I will show you in a moment. So this is the average reference evapotranspiration for different parts of the country. Notice this is the months of the year down here. So we have, here's the different months, and then here's inches of water per month. So obviously we're in the Inland Valley here. And so for, say, the month of July, we're up over 8 inches of water a month that's being lost from the plant, right? So if you want to think about it sort of like as a checking account that you want to keep at 0, if you're losing 8 inches of water, you need to replace 8 inches of water, right? Because we want to keep that, soil full of water and keep it around 8 inches. So if I'm watering a lawn, and especially a cool season lawn, so a cool season lawn or one that's green all year, it's going to use close to that amount of water each month, right? They're usually 8 or in Redding, it's usually 0.8 or 0.9 is what the use of that turf is going to be for that month. But if I have plants that only use, say, they have a water use of 0.10, 0.1 or whatever, they're only going to use 1/10 of that water. So instead of using 8 inches of water, they're using 1/10 of 8 inches, which is what, an eighth of an, or 0.8 of an inch, right? Let's say no, that's not right. Yeah, 0.8 of an inch. So less than 1 inch of water. So instead of having to replace 8 inches, you're replacing 1 inch. All right, so how do we find this information? So this is where we look, and this is the water use classification for all landscape species. UC has added to it over the years, so there's now thousands of different landscape species of plants in there. This is specifically for plants that are used in the landscapes primarily. So if you have an orchard or something like that, that is going to be different. There's actually one for agricultural crops as well. Most agricultural crops you're going to water at a higher rate because you're wanting to get a crop from them. But we're just watering to keep our plant looking nice, right? Not necessarily to promote growth or fruit or production or whatever. This Hopefully that's going to take you there. Yeah. So this is what it looks like, and you can search this then to they have a whole user's manual if you really want to learn the list, but they also have just a list that you can download, or you can search their database. And I recommend the database search because you can go and if you look at this searchable database, you put your city in. Let's just use Red Bluff since I've used Reading so much, I'll use Red Bluff. And then I'm just gonna search for very low water users. And you just click, so you put your city in and you click what you, your very low water user, and it comes up with a list of plants that are in that category. It'll give you, if you choose one and then click on it, then it'll give you all the cultural information that you want to know, like what size it gets, where it grows, that sort of thing, what it looks like. So it's a nice resource. And then if you already have a plant list selected, you can just type those plant names in as well, and it'll tell you the water use. And it's pretty quick, so it's fairly easy to use. So it basically will give you information like this, right? So you get, once you've done that, it'll tell you, you know, a trident maple is 0.6 for its water use. So you know that if I need 8 inches of water in the month of July, I'm going to multiply that by 0.6 to get how many inches I need to give my trident maple. But look at some of these plants that are like California buckwheat that's only 1/10, right? It only needs 0.1. So they're really low water users. So that's where our goal is, to try to get plants that are in this 25 to 10 range to get some of those lower water users. Yes?
How does that translate to gallons?
You can translate it to gallons. Let's see, you're gonna stress my brain in remembering. There's a conversion.
But if I do Google 0.25 inch.
Yeah, and then convert inches to gallons. It's a fairly straightforward conversion. We usually give inches because in drip irrigate, like we're going to recommend that you use drip irrigation, and in drip irrigation, that's usually giving you so many inches per hour. So we want to, or they'll give you either inches per hour or gallons per hour, depending on what you're looking at. But we want to know how much we're putting on for that amount of time. Make sure that as you're selecting your plant, well, I think I've already mentioned this, but just make sure that you're selecting the plant species and the, your variety. So even if you're selecting a plant species, sometimes you want a cultivar or a variety of those. Make sure that it's appropriate for your microclimate in your yard, so shade or sun or those sorts of things. And also that it's going to be appropriate for the spot. So sometimes just because, like for instance, one of the plants we chose in our landscape is a barberry or a berberis. They get giant. They can be like 8 feet across. We chose a very small one that's about 2 feet across. So it's much smaller, so it's not going to overwhelm the whole space. So just because you list, your plant list as a berberis or whatever, make sure that you're choosing one that's actually appropriate for the spot. And then also that even though sometimes some within a species of plants, some will do well in colder climates or will take the heat better and some won't. So make sure that you're choosing one that's going to work for our site. So just don't think that all of them are the same, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. And then do remember sun or full shade. Is it in the sun most of the day or is it in the shade most of the day? That will matter in your selection of plants.